The old YouTube. So yeah, hello everybody. Welcome to my handmade wardrobe sew along for this week. And just checking that you should have some sound. Yeah, that's all looking good. Yeah, that's great. So I am making the ready to party dress in a lovely red leopard print jacquard. And last week we put together the bodice. So we finished that off by joining the front to the back side seams on the top and for the lining as well. So that is all beautiful now. It needs a really good press. Didn't get around to doing that this week, but that would be the next stage. And then I'm going to, I also joined the lining to the skirt. We don't need her at the moment. So I joined the outer to the lining for the wrap skirt. Now in the pattern it doesn't have a lining, but and I advise you to finish with bias binding, but because the fabric, I just wanted it to have a little bit more structure to it, and it's quite stretchy, so I wanted it to kind of, bit of that stretch to be kind of controlled. I decided to line the whole bodice and skirt. So this is a slightly different way of making the dress, so it's great that I can share it with you in a sew along. So yes, I joined the lining to the outer, and then I edge stitch. No, it's not called edge stitching. Understitched the lining, the seam allowances to the lining. So yeah, that's not going anywhere, and it's not going to be peeking out whilst I'm wearing it as well. So that's absolutely brilliant. It's a great way to finish it. So now I need to join my bodice to my two skirts. So to do that, I need to find my other skirt. It's over there. Always helps if you've actually got the two pieces of your wrap skirt. That's the wrap. And just make a little bit of table space here. So bring this down so you can just about still see me, but you can see the table a little bit. So we have one piece of skirt. Put that down. And then, so this is the great escaping skirt, escaping dress. It's because of the lining made it really slinky, so it just keeps falling off the table. So we're going to join the two skirt pieces, first of all, right sides together with the outsides, so the outer fabric joined. So at this stage, we're only going to join the front and the back, the two backs of the outer fabric. I'll just start by bringing the back seam and the waistline seam together. So the back seam has all been finished off with the overlocker, because I didn't want that to stretch out or fray whilst I'm attaching the zip. And then I can just start to So what I need to do is to take the bodice edge and line the side seam of the bodice with the side seam. So we're attaching the bodice to the skirt at this point. So I've just aligned the bodice and the outer at the side seams. And I'm going to use a pin to make sure that those side seams definitely match up. So that's a technique that I always like to use. Just through, make sure that it's running straight on that side it's also running on that side, and then you're guaranteed that everything will line up. So my darts line up nicely, which is always a good thing. Always makes me very happy when that happens. Nothing's gone wobbly whilst I've been sewing. So they're looking good. And then I've got my back seam of my bodice and my back seam of my skirt. Join those. There we go. Okay. And then on my front bodice and front skirt panel, my seam and my dart should match. So again, get everything really nice and neatly lined up. And I've got my lining matching up to there, which is great. Okay. So now I can start to bring my lining back on itself. Now that I've got all of my bodice aligned. And I can bring my lining to match everything. Now at this point, I'm actually only going to attach the top bit of my lining. Sorry, the front bit of my lining. So I'm only going to sew the bodice to the front bit of my lining. And the reason for this is it's much neater. I can create a much neater effect on the inside if I just attach the concealed zip to the outer fabric, and then I can cover it with the lining. If I joined the lining and the outer at this point and then tried to attach the zip to both of those, I have to be careful that my lining doesn't slip at this point, then I would end up with raw edges that I'd have to overlock and they'd be visible on the inside of the garment. So that's something that I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to make it all look lovely and bagged out. So this is the problem when you go a bit off-piste with the pattern instructions. You tend to have to make it up, and that's what I'm here for, to help you with that. Okay, so I've got my outer bodice and outer skirt fabric joined up to the side seam, and then for side seam, I've got my lining and outer skirt and outer bodice joined at the waist seam. So I want to go ahead and do exactly the same again with the other skirt panel, because of course we've got two skirt panels wrapping over each other to make up this skirt. So once again, I'm going to take the outer fabric waistline and with right sides together, I'm going to match the back seam and pin that. I'm going to match my darts and my seam lines. I'm going to match my skirt side seams. And then my skirt wrap actually matches with where the dart is on the front of the skirt. So I can bring that right over to match that. That's the kind of thing that drives me mad whenever if I use another pattern and everything's not all matched and neat, because I really like all my darts and my seams to match as much as possible. It just looks nicer to the eye when the garment's worn. Especially with a special occasion dress like this. I just want it to be a little bit extra special and extra neat, extra tidy. And with our patterns, hopefully it's extra easy to achieve that. One thing I tend to do when I'm dealing with loads and loads of layers at this point is I'll actually just put on any seams that I want to keep open. Obviously, press the seam open, but you want to maybe put some pins on the seam allowance edges just to make sure that it absolutely does not fold back on itself. So there's no chance of that happening because you've got so many layers to think about. You've got the underneath and the top. And if you just give that yourself that little extra helping hand, remember that pins are there to help you control what you're going to sew. So if you need a few extra pins, that's something that you should definitely add in. So I'm just transferring the pins that I've already put in through all 5 layers now at the front. So your 5 layers are your bodice, single layer of outer fabric, and then 2 layers of outer and lining and outer and lining for the left-hand side of the skirt and the right-hand side of the skirt. So now I have everything pinned. What I'm going to have to be careful of when I'm sewing, of course, is that I don't get my lining pieces caught up at all. So I'm just making sure they are going to be out of the way at the side. I need to continue that. Nice. I'm just going to go back and unpin the second skirt panel that I put in because I haven't included the lining. There's a centre front notch on this as well, which is really handy for making sure that everything is lining up. I always think more notches the better with these things. And if you put your pins with your head sticking out, you can take them out, you can keep replacing them. So that makes all the difference too. Okay, so don't want to forget that I need to flip my lining back on itself for the other panel as well. So the second panel just goes on in the same way, like so. And then I can pin that in place. Where any darts meet, try and make sure that the lining dart goes one way and the outer dart goes the other, because then you can reduce the bulk straight away, especially at these points in the garment where the wrap skirt and the two darts meet each other. You've got a whole lot going on there. So just make sure that you're reducing bulk wherever you can, and it will just create a much neater finish. Okay, that's looking nice. It's really important at this point to make sure that you are getting all of your raw edges aligned. And this might be the point where if you're using a really slinky fabric, like say a satin or something like that, you might want to hand tack, just to make sure that it's definitely in the right place before you go to the sewing machine to secure it. Lots to think about with this. It's a bit of a quieter, more involved sew along today. I think sometimes those are the ones that are a bit more interesting, because I'm definitely showing you some techniques that you really need to know that are new and aren't in the instructions, because the instructions don't include a lining, they include instructions for how to finish the edge with the bias binding. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to sew the front section from here to here through all of those layers. So I've got my 2 layers of lining, my 2 layers of outer skirt, and my 1 layer of bodice. So I'm going to sew from here to here, and then I'm going to flip back the lining, and I'm going to sew from here to the back, so from the side seam to the back seam on one side, and then flip the lining back again and sew from the side seam to the back seam. Now I would recommend, once you have inserted your zip, that you go back and just do a little bit of a reinforcing stitch over the bit that you haven't sewn, and that will definitely help neaten everything up, but we'll come to that later on. Okay, hello sewing machine, you can come back now. Who's this one that we're working with? Kim. We're working with Kim today. We've named all of our sewing machines so that if they misbehave, then we know which one we need to send off to naughty camp. Because yeah, we've just had these sewing machines in. They're on hire from Janoni, and yeah, they're lovely machines to work with. We're still getting to grips with them, and I'll always love the Innovis machines that we've used previously. We've still got 2 of those. That's what my machine is at home. But yeah, I think definitely growing to love these machines, and they're fab for beginners as well. They really are. We've run a couple of beginners classes with them, and we've also used them to make jeans, because we had a jeans making workshop last weekend. So yeah, they powered through like anything that we threw at them, any fabric, top stitching, thick layers. Yeah, they just did it, which is what you want. Now I'm getting close to my side seam, and I need to remember to keep my lining out of the way. So I've got my lining, I'm just keeping that out of the way, and I'm only going to sew up to my side seam. There we go. And I'll just do a little back stitch at that point, just for a bit of extra security. Okay, so now I'm going to flip my lining back over, and I'm going to sew through all of my layers. Now, before I start sewing, I'm just going to double check. Definitely lining is out of the way, outer is in the right place. Always check the underneath of your garment, no matter what. There's nothing worse than sewing and realising that you've constantly flipped something over. Just a little check as you go along will make all the difference. Equally with this, don't pull your pins out too soon. You should be able to stitch almost right up to your pins before you need to do anything, before you need to take anything out. So I'm just at my pin there. I'm going to pop that out. Now, because my fabric has a bit of stretch to it, I am finding that I'm getting a little bit of walking going on. I'm just going to discourage that a little. There we go, that's better. What I probably should have done before doing this row of stitching is I should have stay stitched this edge, because I knew that my fabric had a bit of stretch in it. It's got a bit of elastane in. So top tip for you, if you are using fabric that has stretch with a natural or added elastane, do a bit of stay stitching and it will stop it from stretching out. Coming to my other side. Now, because this is stretched a little, I might end up with a couple of puckers at the waistline. Now, I am planning to make a lovely little belt for this, which I will share the instructions with you in a future sew along. But if you want a smoother line, then you definitely need to add some stay stitching or even some stay tape at the waistline if you're using a stretchier fabric. Foot pedals are running away. Now I'm reaching that side seam again, so I'm just going to stitch right up to that. Get to that side seam just there. I can do some back stitching again. Okay. Fabric out. Oh no, the dreaded. Ran out of bobbin. Only about 10 centimetres ago. So happens to us all. One thing about the changing machines is that I find that I'm used to the sound of what the old machines, the brother machines, sound like when they run out of bobbin. It does make a slightly different sound, and if you've got an old machine, you know what I mean. It definitely is a different sound, and I haven't quite worked out what it sounds like with the genuine machines yet. So yeah, it's one of those things that comes as a little bit of a surprise. Should do. Now, did you know that if you... Oh, my foot's just come off. There we go. Did you know that if you your needle up, and this goes for overlockers as well, with the press foot down, the tension dials will be locked. So you won't be able to, it will basically mean that the thread doesn't set right. So if you find that you're threading up the machine and then you do your first stitches and the thread pops out every time, that could be the reason why, that you're threading up with your presser foot down and the tension dials aren't grabbing the thread as they need to. So always thread up with your presser foot up. A little top tip for today. You thought you were learning about how to put concealed zips in, but no, you get an added bonus as well. Bit of sewing machine etiquette. This is what it's like if you come on a workshop, by the way. You will get like tidbits of information and knowledge sprinkled into your workshop at every possible moment. 7 years of teaching, we've got quite a lot of combined knowledge. Well, to be honest, a couple of our teachers, Tracy, has been teaching for probably, I don't want to age her, 15 years. We've definitely got a lot to share with you guys. We are starting to do a lot more of the in-person workshops as well. One that I'm particularly excited about is the upcoming pattern cutting workshops that we've got coming up. We ran our first one this month. Sorry, in February now, aren't we? We ran our first one in January. And it was just amazing. It really was. Our new pattern cutting teacher is fantastic. She's worked for London College of Fashion. She's worked for Central St Martin's, and she really knows her stuff. But she teaches traditional pattern cutting, so kind of, I think, the way it should be, with pencil and paper. And she really makes sure that you are getting a good grasp of the theory rather than just jumping straight into computer pattern design and grading, because you need to know, even with computerized pattern design and grading, you need to know the basics. You need to know how to pivot your darts. You need to know how to slash and spread. You need to know how to change a dart into gathers or pleats or whatever you want to add to your design, while still keeping the 3D shape of the garment that you're creating. And that is exactly what she teaches. So she spends the first section of the morning teaching you all of the theory, basically everything you need to know about how to move suppression, as we call it, around the body. So suppression is basically how we shape a garment, how a garment is shaped to fit around you. So the fact that we don't get a piece of cloth and go and expect it to fit, we have to take in darts, we have to take gathers, we have to take pleats to make it actually fit around you, to mould around you, to sculpt, basically. Yeah, so she teaches you how to sculpt fabric to fit you through a series of fabulous methods. And then in the afternoon, she also makes sure that the bespoke block that you've made, the bespoke block that she will make for you, fits you. So she does a full fitting surgery, makes sure that it is a lovely fit on you. And then in the afternoon, you get to make your own design. So you design a few different variations, and then she'll talk you through, and I'll help you out with decisions about how to actually make that up. Yeah, and it's just a really fantastic course, and I would really recommend it to anybody who's got even a slight interest in garment design and pattern making, because it's fascinating. It really is. It's empowering as well. So I'll just have a check of it before I show you. So we have joined the bodice to the skirt, and I think it's looking absolutely gorgeous. And not that I'm one to show off, but how is that for a nice join? We've got the dart and the wrap and the other dart underneath just peeking out, and it's all beautifully matched. Quite happy with that. That's a good way to kind of get towards the end of the week, isn't it? So fabulous. Next thing is putting in the zip. So you can put in a concealed zip with a normal presser foot, but it's much, much easier if you do it with a concealed zip foot. Now, most machines will come with, I'm going to get out the normal presser foot to show you. So most machines will come with a foot that looks a bit like this. Just hold it like that. And the idea is basically the needle can get really, really close to the zip teeth, but the foot keeps the zip teeth out of the way of the needle to make sure that you don't go breaking any needles or ending up with a mess going on when you've sewn through your zip. So you can use that. It doesn't allow you to get really, really close to your concealed zip. Or you can use, find hand here, a concealed zip foot. Now that is a concealed zip foot. And the idea is basically, you can see at the back, the zip teeth go in these little grooves, one of either of these little grooves, and goes on the machine that way up. So you've got your little bar. It's a clip-on foot. Most modern machine feet are clip-on, so they just clip off like that and clip on like so. So just bring the presser foot lever down and it clips onto the machine. And I've just brought my needle down there to just double check that it's definitely going to go into the hole. Now, I'm noticing that the hole is ever so slightly offset. And as my needle is going down, it's actually just rubbing slightly on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my needle position to more center. So you should have this function on most machines. I just want to absolutely make sure that I'm not hitting anything. I'm going to bring the foot down and just have a look. It is close, and one of the problems with, we'll see how we get on. So zipper feet, in fact all machine feet, they can look very similar. You can buy universal versions of feet. This one that I'm using here is one that is specific for Brother. It was made by Brother, so it's a Brother concealed zip foot. It wasn't made for Janome machines, so there is a chance that it won't be exactly in the right place. When I've got the fabric under, I'll be able to see whether the hole is in exactly the right place, but it might be that on the Janome, the needle is placed ever so slightly further back. It can be 1 millimetre or 0.5 millimetre. It will make a difference, because if the needle hits any part of that concealed zip foot, it could break or bend the needle. So we'll give it a go and we'll see how we get on with it. So before we do anything else, oops, that's not a very nice sound. I'm just going to discuss what I've done with the concealed zip foots, for the concealed zip. So I have pressed the concealed zip. Press the zip teeth flat. As I discussed last week, if you use a YKK zip, you'll be absolutely fine with pressing the zip teeth. And you basically just you open up the zip, put the zip on the ironing board and roll those teeth out. So you're just rolling them. They should usually be kind of folded over like that, and you just roll them so they're completely flat and then iron. And you can tell that when it's ironed enough, when if you zip it up rather than lying nice and flat like it usually does, it kind of curls up like this. So it should usually lie flat, but it doesn't. And there is a very, very detailed tutorial about how to put concealed zips in, but I'm just going over the kind of essentials really today. But yeah, there's a very, very in-depth detailed tutorial for how to put concealed zips in on our My Handmade Wardrobe Patterns blog. In fact, there's detailed tutorials for most things, especially techniques that feature in our patterns. So always make sure you take a look at that if you're struggling with any techniques, or if you just want to learn a new way of doing something, or just check that the way that you're doing it is correct. So one thing I want to make sure of, because I'm going to be attaching the bodice lining to the skirt, I want to make sure that my seam line at my waist is facing upwards towards the bodice. So just making sure that that is. And then I'm going to carefully position my zip like so. I want to make really sure that I'm not stretching any of this fabric out, because as I said, it is stretchy. It's mostly stretchy across the grain, but it also has a little bit of up and down stretch, just purely because of the jacquard weave. Just makes it a bit more movie, really. So yeah, I'm just making sure that that is spot on. Now, I should have said, if you're not sure about the fit of the garment, the time to try it on is before you put in the zip. So you can try it on, see if you can find somebody to help pin you into it. And that is the perfect time to check the fit of everything and make any adjustments that you need to. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do, and you could do this by hand, that's absolutely fine, but I like to machine baste for speed. So I'm going to just switch out that foot again and just put a normal foot on. And I'm going to move my needle all the way over to the left. And I'm just going to machine baste my zip onto my fabric. This is going to be just a long stitch, so take it to the longest it'll go to. On my machine, that's 5. And this is just basically to replace the pins and make sure that you haven't got anything in the way when you're using the concealed zip foot that's going to make things at all more difficult. Now, this basting stitching can stay in, or you can take it out afterwards. But we're just doing a nice long stitch, just so it's fast, basically. I'm a big fan of adding in a little bit of basting stitch where needed. I'm not a big fan of doing hand tacking, but there is a time and a place for it. I'd love to know from you guys, are you a hand tacker or a machine baster, or just a gung-ho wing it and use some pins? To be honest, I'm a bit of everything. It does depend on the project. But you need to have got it wrong a fair few times in order to know what technique to choose the next time. So it's all a learning opportunity, isn't it? Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do, I've attached one side, basted that in. I'm just going to close the zip. And the reason I'm doing that is that I want to make sure that where the join is on the skirt and the bodice joining the seam line, I want to make sure that the zip is aligned at that point, so you don't end up with kind of a staggered join. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pin because I have that to hand. I would recommend you use some chalk just to mark where the seam line and the zip meet. Okay. Open that up carefully, try not to lose my pin. I am going to bring the garment over, so you're basically taking outer, bringing it all the way over. And this is where people tend to get quite confused and put their zip in wonky. So you want the zip tape edge to be aligned with the back seam on the other side. So just bring it all the way over and then align it like that, and you will definitely not have any problems with it having twisted. Okay. And I've just transferred pin through to both layers so that that is definitely attached properly. And now I need to go ahead and do the same again, pinning and machine basting the zip in place. We're nearly there. So yeah, I'd definitely say this is like a 3-step process. So pinning, you're basting, and then we're going to do the final sew, and you'll see that will create an almost invisible zip, which is what we want. Just checking, I think I've got a little bit of thought I had a tiny little bit of a tuck, but no, it's looking fine. Gotta make sure that your fabrics behave, haven't you? Keep checking in on them. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to check. So I've got my 2 tailor's tacks at the bottom of the split. And I'm just going to bring my fabric together at that point, because that's a really obvious kind of matching point. Just bring my back seams together, and I'm going to look at where my last bit of basting stitching is. So it's about there, and just transfer that to the other side, the other side of the back skirt. Just then it gives me an idea about where things should match up, just to make sure. So I don't want anything stretched out ideally at this point, or any point really, but especially not at this point. Nice. It's interesting. I think like the back of a garment is often the most viewed bit of the garment, but obviously not by yourself. Because if you think, like a lot of the time, you know, people are walking behind you. At weddings, you've got. My wedding dress, I actually went for like quite a simple, plain front, but all the drama was at the back. So I had like a low V back and an embroidered belt on it with lots of hand embroidery. It's because I thought that's what people are going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at my back for the whole time. And it's also where things can really go wrong, especially with the concealed and zip. You can really end up with puckers and things like that. Just even a small amount of puckering can make it look a bit, well, not as good as it could. So yeah, if there are ways to prevent that by just making sure that you're matching up the right bits, then it can make all the difference. Nearly at the bottom. Back stitching at that point, even though it's a basting stitch, I still like to do a couple of back stitches, just because you still don't want it full coming apart until you actually want to take it apart. Okay, so now for the moment of truth. Now, I apologise if stage fright has got to me and this doesn't work brilliantly, but fingers crossed, when I do up the zip, the seams will match up. Oh, I'm nervous about this now. Let's see. Now, of course, it's a little trickier to do up because the zip isn't fitted perfectly yet. Stuck in. And I think once we've got the concealed zip foot on and we've sewn nice and close, that's going to be pretty spot on. So yeah, that's what you can achieve. So now for the magic foot bit, and I love this bit, it just makes it so easy. So I'm going to pop the foot off, the normal foot off, pop the concealed zip foot on, and I love how easy these are to change. Now, most importantly, I'm going to move my needle. So I think I worked out that if it was on 3, it would be right in the middle and it'd be perfect. And then I'm going to change my stitch length back down because I had it on 5 for the basting stitch. So I've changed that over. And then I am going to pop my zip in the little groove to the right of the pokey out bit, technical term, and on the foot, and I'm going to stitch. And it does seem to be, that's good. Yeah, nothing seems to be hitting where it shouldn't, so this is all good. Now this foot has a little kind of pokey out bit guide, which helps you to know where your stitches are being created. And that's beautiful already. Nice thing is, once you've done it a few times, you know when it's going to work. So, and as long as I keep my zip in the guide, I know that my stitches are being created in exactly the right place, which is an exciting thing. To make sure I don't get too overexcited at this point and let any other fabrics come and join the party. Very itchy face today. Right. Now we're getting towards the end. Now I'm giving the fabric a little bit of a pull. I would usually say not to do that, but just because I've got quite a lot of fabric now, I'm really having to guide it. So really, really gently nudge the fabric through. No pulling, just a little bit of a gentle kind of persuasion. That's what we're going for here. So I'm getting down to the end, and I will get to a point where I just can't stitch forwards anymore because the zip is in the way. I'm not going to go around the zip. I'm going to stop at that point. If I can't go any further because the zip pull is in the way, I'm going to stop. I'm going to backstitch. And I need to be careful when I'm backstitching that I am backstitching on the zip tape and not on the zip. And then I'm going to lift out my needle, cut off my fabric, and do exactly the same thing on the other side. I'm going to wait for the big reveal when I actually do it all up. But it is looking nice and tightly inserted so far. Now I did the more difficult side first. On this side, I can hold the bulk of the fabric out of the way, which is a relief, to be honest. Often, if things are going well, it's a good idea to just get the difficult bit out of the way first. If things are going badly, either get the easy bit out of the way to build up your confidence, or go and make yourself a cup of tea or gin and come back to it later. extra sewing face today. I usually stick my tongue out whilst I'm sewing, but I burnt my lip on some mashed potato last night, so I'm going to keep doing that. So, extra sewing face. Right, so I got down to the bottom, I did my back stitching, and now the first time that you do up your zip, it's going to be quite tight. Well, if you've put the zip in really well, it will feel quite tight. Don't worry, that's how it's meant to be. It's not that you've caught any of the wrong bits of fabric, probably, most likely. And I'd like to reveal to you my pretty much spot on, beautiful inserted zip, which will look even more beautiful once it is ironed. But I think you'll agree with me that that is quite a nice zip, really. And you can do that. All you need to do is just follow the 3-step process. Follow the tutorial on our My Handmade Wardrobe blog, and take your time and enjoy it. And yeah, it will look gorgeous. So to finish off the bottom of the seam, what I would do next is switch over to a normal zip foot, and then I would sew, and this is the bit that really makes the difference. I would sew basically where my last stitches are. So I've just got a couple of last stitches there. I would sew just over those stitches and continue down about 5 centimeters. Just keep making sure that I'm keeping the zip ends out of the way. And then I'd switch back to my normal foot and continue the seam. Don't continue sewing with your zip foot. You will end up with a really wobbly seam. That is what will happen. And yeah, it's tempting not to keep switching your feet, but it really does make a big difference. So I really would recommend that you do that. Right, so I'm going to come back to you next week when we're just going to be finishing off the back split. And I will have pressed the dress beautifully by then, I promise. And I'll show you how to create the back split, and also how to join the bodice lining to the garment. I've got quite a clever little way of doing that, which I'm hoping that I'll be able to share with you. So hopefully you'll join me again next week for the sew along, and yeah, I will see you again next Thursday. Till then, happy sewing. Bye.